I feel there's a lot of social expectations put on
Mhm.
first
Mhm.
responders that
Mhm.
of course, there are heroes, there
Mhm.
are rescuers, and they're also human. But I
Mhm.
think that we as a society might forget that they are human,
Yes. Yes.
and thus they might forget that
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
On top of their families and loved ones, just the expectations
Mhm.
families have to support their loved one as a
Mhm.
first responder.
Welcome to the First Responder Families podcast, sponsored by Shadowproof at FHE Health, a nationally recognized behavioral health provider. I am your host, Ivona Bhadha, a director of family services at FHE Health and a family, couples, and trauma therapist. Join me for meaningful conversations and talks that support wellness and mental health of first responders and their families. Hello, first responder families. Hi, here is Ivana and Dr. Sachi Ananda, and we are here together for monthly conversation. And I'm really excited about sharing with you about shame and guilt in a way that you haven't heard it before. And really what we want to share from our hearts and minds, to reframing and giving you some tips to heal the chronic guilt and shame that disconnects us from ourselves and from others. So welcome. And we have a great treat here, Dr. Sachi Ananda. So she has a lot of hats. The most important thing that she makes a difference in the world is that she leads a program for first responders. It is a shadowproof program at FHE Health. She is our fearless leader. She's a PhD in clinical sexology. And just like myself, this relentless student of psychotherapy modalities. So she is certified first responders trauma therapist, and she is trained in EMDR and doing intense EMDR therapy, leading that program also here at Shadowproof at FHE Health. She is trained in complex trauma treatment. And just like me, we have a love for uh, NARM, which stands for Neuroaffective Relational Model for complex trauma and attachment trauma. And so we will be talking about healing guilt and shame from that perspective. In addition, altogether, we are trained in IFS, internal family systems, and also integral breathwork therapy. So we want to talk about guilt and shame in a way that it's helpful, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also bring up some insights so you can start identifying, where you may be guilting yourself, maybe shaming yourself, and you didn't know about it previously. So, welcome.
Yeah, well, and so thank you, Ms. Lana, for inviting me. And I'm very excited about this topic. I'm learning, I'm a continual learner of life and of people and how to help first responders. And this is a new way of thinking about guilt and shame. Maybe not new as in totally new, because it's been much more in the media, I believe, with shame, with some therapists and authors out there talking more about it. But I really love how NARM is really helping me not only how to help clients with guilt and shame, but healing my own guilt and shame and not even realizing how much I shame myself on a chronic basis, just for full disclosure about myself as a human being
Yeah.
and the things that about my journey.
So you are meeting therapists who have their own therapists. So nice to meet you. We believe in therapy. We believe in integration of what we are learning, what we are getting from our own therapy, and integrating it so we can be helpers. Yeah, and this is actually our audience are helpers and their families who are helping them, to hold space sometimes in a very difficult occupational, stressors and traumas. So, where should we begin?
Well, I just one thing I think about with first responders that I don't know if that it automatically comes to mind that when you think of guilt and shame, you would think of the population as having a lot of guilt and shame. But I actually find that they're like the prime population to have guilt and shame, like chronically,
Mhm, mhm,
because I feel there's a lot of social expectations put on
mhm,
first
mhm,
responders that
mhm,
there, of course, there are heroes, there
mhm,
are rescuers, and they're also human. But I
mhm.
think that we as a society might forget that they are human,
Yes, yes.
and thus they might forget that
Mhm,
too.
mhm,
On top of their families and loved ones, just the expectations
mhm,
families have to support their loved one as a
mhm,
first responder.
mhm,
Like I think this is such a great topic for us to explore with this
mhm,
population because I don't think that's the first thought when people think of that. What do you
mhm.
think? Do you think that people associate guilt and shame with first responders?
No, no, and yeah, there is this cultural so expectation of what they do, how we see them, and we call them when we are in trouble, and so even with that, we call them when we are in trouble. Whom do they call when their trees are falling? And that's where we can start breaking down the experience of shame being even like this internal deeply personal experience of I feel bad for my needs, I feel bad for my humanity. When you were sharing back to Sachi, I was the word that came to me, or two words, is survival guilt, because sooner or later, first responders in all different public safety and military areas, they will encounter the that they may have survived someone or they didn't save someone. That's on their occupational side. This sense that can really be chronic. They may get stuck in that one shift night, or day, when they couldn't rescue someone. And then the other side is families that I hear from them that they often have these shame or guilt that their problems are not like real problems. Imagine the first responder who is saving stranded children, and then you have maybe a teacher who is spouse a teacher who is stressed out by kids, and then they get into this dynamic, where they cannot hear each other.
Yeah, I love a lot of thoughts are coming to mind as you just shared that is minimizing their needs.
Mhm.
But when you going back to what you shared about as a first responder, they rescue people. Who do they go to?
Mhm.
And my first thought was, I think the families want that to be them.
Mhm. Mhm.
That if their loved one is in need, they would
Mhm.
probably expect it would be them,
Mhm.
families and spouses, but by and large, it's actually not their first go to.
Mhm.
And when we put it in a guilt and shame framework,
Mhm.
that family member may think there's something wrong with me that they
Mhm.
don't want to come to me when they're
Mhm.
struggling.
Mhm.
or when they come home and they have a very flat face affect, not responding to my questions and my concern of wanting to see how they're doing. And when they don't respond in a way that makes me feel like I'm helping them, then the first automatic reaction isn't, oh, what's wrong with what are they going through? It's more like, what am I not providing for them? Why do they not feel safe with me? You're married to me, for example, as the spouse. So then that's the shame part. Is there something wrong with me that my first responder is shutting down or won't smile at me when they come home from being on duty?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when first responders come to treatment, they start naming it that it is kind of two-way streets, disconnection. They come home, their nervous system shuts down. They no longer have to be on duty, and their families don't get their authenticity or smile or their presence, and that causes chronic disconnection.
Yeah, I think I had a thought when you were just sharing that. Oh, what I've learned working with first responders in therapy is it's not that they don't want to connect with their loved one. It's that they feel they can't put away that internal desire to be the rock for them. That they have to be for the rock for their neighborhood, for their departments, for their community, even like their nation. And when they come home, they don't take that off internally. It stays with them. So for them, they don't want to be a burden to their loved one by sharing what they're going through. So it's almost like their protection of others continues. It's like 24/7 with and then you could see, wow, there's that disconnection is I don't want to burden you with my problems. However, the other end, I want to know your problems so we can connect.
Yeah.
Uh,
And the words, I feel like a burden, or what I feel internally here, it feels like I'm going to burden someone. I'm going to make someone suffer if I share with them. That itself, friends, believe or not, is a dynamic of shame, or guilt. I mean, shame would be more about who I am. I am a burden. Um, uh, Guilt is more about what we do. Like communicating my needs or feelings, like that would feel like we would feel guilty about doing it. Yeah, I'm just encouraging everyone who is listening, to take a moment. If it's you that feels at times, when you are struggling, when you are going through difficult time, what do you do with that? And how do you convince yourself that it is not okay, to reach out? Yeah. And going back to survival guilt, what I learned from NARM, um, how they respond to that is that the survival guilt, like I feel bad that I survive while my friend, my colleague, died, and I feel guilty that I didn't do enough. That is like a survival strategy, to deal with the pain, because it doesn't have any logic and rational, because we are hardwired to live and to really survive in this world. So if we put so much guilt and shame on ourselves that we survive, we are going against our hardwired, instinct to live. Yeah.
This makes me think of what really was helpful for me in the NARM
Mm.
methodology is talking about environmental failures in childhood.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you talk
Mm.
about that survivor's guilt
Mhm.
as a way to cope with pain of
Mhm.
grief and sadness
Mhm.
and loss, I think of that strategy was likely learned,
Mhm.
this is, in their early development.
Mhm.
And I think what I feel is different in this methodology is, I mean, we talk about like childhood trauma, but how
Mhm.
NARM understands it is or explains it as more that it's not the child that failed, it's not even the parents that failed.
Mhm.
It's not any of that. It's that there were things environmentally
Mhm.
that had failed to
Mhm.
support a child to be
Mhm.
able to express their needs, feel their needs,
Mhm.
and for them to receive the
Mhm.
proper support for it. So,
Almost.
and I think of that with first responders in particular, because I think that's where the chronic guilt and shame comes from. It's like, I was a bad kid
Mhm.
and I couldn't help, say, my mother who was in a
Mhm.
domestic violence
Mhm.
situation
Mhm.
and that I was bad
Mhm. Mhm.
because I couldn't save her.
Mhm.
Now, growing up, I'm going to do everything I can to save people
Mhm.
as a first responder,
Mhm.
especially women, for example, in need.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then so they carry this strategy
Mhm.
of, instead of dealing with just the pain of
Mhm.
not having of being helpless
Mhm.
as a child in those type of situations, it turns into an internal blaming of themselves. And
Mhm.
then they, without, proper healing or support, then that just grows into adulthood, that
Yeah.
chronic guilt
Mhm.
and shame that I'm
Mm.
not doing enough. And so that's why I see first responders so crushed when an incident
Mhm.
goes and is fatal or does not go the
Mm.
way protocol had planned, and they blame
Mhm.
themselves. They don't
Mhm.
blame the situation or just life happens,
Mhm.
all these other factors, but it's
Mm.
this internal blame of
Yeah.
themselves.
Just even the worst that goes with that scenario, I failed, it is a language of shame, and so if you find yourself, listeners, in that thought process, and of course there is a feeling as well, but it's just a really slight minor aspect of shame. It is this habit of interpreting, the life situations over which we don't have control, with this um, responsibility for it, with this identity. I failed, So yeah, yeah. I heard this little funny metaphor about like childhood in case someone is like a little on offense. Childhood again. I don't want to. I'm not a blamer. I don't blame my parents or something. I want to encourage you to not to turn us off. We are not here to blame shame the parents or the childhood environment. Rather to look at it. Childhood is like a party, and if your environment, including extended family and the culture or a neighborhood, if it's a supportive, nourishing, nurturing environment, that it's a good party. And on the other side, if there is um, a lack of attunement to your needs, emotions, if there is a neglect or abuse and other traumatizing events, it's a bad party for a child. So in those scenarios and environments, the child has one and only big dilemma in that unsupportive, and it is like, do I really uh, feel my authenticity and then express myself fully alive, everything what I'm discovering about the world, um or I will shut it down. I will disconnect from it, and preserve somehow, at least hope that my environment will change and will support me. Because if I have unsupported, unloving environment, but I cannot hold it, it's too painful for a child to think that, oh, my parents have no capacity to love, and I'm kind of screwed. It's like a death. So the child has to start adapting to that unsupportive and harsh environment, and start relying on their, I would say, like improving self-improvement and self-correction. And sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes the environment is very explicitly shaming and guilty. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's implicit. There is just the person is not being seen and their needs for they are, and there's a stress in the family, and parents are not attuned to children. That also causes for children to start relying just on self-improvement and correcting themselves, and avoidance strategies. I share with you in the morning that my type of shaming or guilting myself is to go through enormous list of things, out of fear of that I will let someone down, or I will mess up, I will make a mistake. So I have this intelligent survival strategy of avoiding feeling shame.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so much there for all of us really to soak in. I mean, it's um when I think about, the self-blame and the it's like the driving force to achieve. And I find that very true with first responders, that that there's this drive to be the hero, and then some, to keep climbing up the ladder in their departments, to continue to give in their churches, and to do whatever they can to meet these really unrealistic expectations they have of themselves. And I think that mirrors families too,
Yeah.
that they may also feel some pressure, or they're pressuring themselves with whatever strategies they've had growing up, to also paint a really white picket fence image of their family and all the things they feel they have to keep doing to keep that image up, and then foregoing what you really need for yourself and in your relationship with the first responder. It just made me, I mean, I can really relate to, and I'm just learning more about how much I pressure myself as a director of this program, and all the pressures I put on myself to learn more interventions. And like me and Ivona, we are like addicted to continuing education. we just can't get enough of it. And that might be, at least for me, partly this drive I have, that I don't know enough and I need to look like I know everything. That's the pressure I put on myself.
Yeah. Yeah. You probably had that more because you already got your PhD, but I find myself at times like, researching PhD programs, but I pause and I stop. And that's where that adult agency comes, because I see more like a little child in me that wants to, like, if I only get this title or these credentials, then it can be really driven through that child who got this felt sense. If I am a better child, if I accomplish more, then the hope is that then I will be loved,
Yeah.
And so many of us have had this implicit kind of belief that, we, through our doing or accomplishments, we finally um, arrive to some kind of happiness, and part of it is to feel loved. So yeah.
I think about too was the drive of first responder. I also find that there's a drive for them to feel like a responsibility financially for the family. I know what
Mhm.
that a lot of first responder jobs include like having pension
Mhm.
and benefits and
Mhm.
whatnot, and that there's this really strong need to have to feel like they have to financially take
Mhm.
care of everyone in
Yeah.
their family,
Mhm.
despite them having some serious post-traumatic stress
Mhm.
symptoms
Mhm.
from their job, and they still
Mhm.
push forward because they
Mhm.
feel such a heavy responsibility.
Mhm.
And it just made me think of that. Just there's just so many examples or specific ways that they might
Mhm.
pressure
No.
themselves
Yeah.
to be that person.
Yeah, one of the things that first responders share with us on daily basis is also how they push themselves beyond the exhaustion,
Yes.
beyond the so there's this very subtle but very deep rejection of their own needs, so they put needs of others ahead of themselves. And again, it may not look like a shame and guilt, but when they open up and when they start talking in therapy, they share that they feel tremendously guilty to um, say no, for example, or to say no to something so they can rest, or to say no to overtime.
Yeah.
They feel that would be enough guilt or shame, to disconnect you from your what you truly need, and then it leads to those mm, survival strategies like substance abuse, or it can be sexual compulsion, it can be gambling. Um, so it is then getting needs met indirectly, but with the behaviors that it is never enough, and it's very short-term satisfaction. So part of the healing for first responders and also their spouses, for example, is to be attuned to their own needs, ask for it, and reach out or give it to self, healthy fulfillment of their needs, nutrition, movement, rest, sleep. Those are our really organic needs that may fulfillment and completion of those needs allow us to be in our high self and in the nervous system regulation.
Mm. I love what you're saying about also having that time or a conscious effort, however small, to slow down and to not just have a knee-jerk reaction with your typical strategies,
Yeah, yeah.
and providing that
Mhm.
space. So I think of when I describe first responders, I'd say generally they're very type A. And
Mhm.
I'm very type A, so there's nothing against type A's, but there is that type A type uh, behavior or lifestyle where you just don't stop. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, got this done. What's next? And,
Mhm.
you just keep moving forward.
Mhm.
And there's not that time that, at least for me, I can say I allow myself time to just breathe rather than just go on to the next
Mhm.
task on my to-do
Mhm.
list so
Mhm.
that I can perfectly accomplish everything I plan to,
Mhm.
even
Yeah.
today or in my
Yeah.
life, my career.
Mhm.
And I wonder too, with the listeners out there, families and
Mhm.
spouses of first responders, how
Mhm.
much are they in that type A, especially if they aren't or don't want to or don't have the capacity to ask for help or even identify their
Mhm.
needs. They're gonna do it all themselves.
Mhm.
And it's gonna be this like, okay, did this task, what's next? And it's just like you don't even have time to pause
Mhm. Mhm.
and think of really what I love about NARM is it starts off with you asking your client, what do you want for
Oh,
yourself?
yeah. Yeah.
And I'm shocked that that's such a seemingly basic, but not a basic question. Even when I get asked that in therapy sessions, is like, I don't actually know what I want. And you think about childhood environmental failures, that environmental failures meant there wasn't opportunities for that child to feel important enough to have somebody ask them what their internal world is like and what they want for themselves to them. And so I just think of that for like a first responder or first responder family. Like, how much have we asked ourselves, what do we really want? Yeah. In a deep level, not just like, oh, we want a new car or something.
And that's the origin of guilt and shame, that from that unfulfillment of those needs for being seen and heard and understood. There's gonna be the felt sense of shame. So it must be something wrong with me. It's the vulnerability. We have vulnerability when we have feelings, when we have needs, and when it's met with environmental rejection of it, then we experience shame, and it follows vulnerability. So then we are in the next dynamic, how much for first responders and their families, how much the vulnerability is rejected, and yet in adulthood, it's a way how we feel loved and connected through being vulnerable. Not all the time. Trees are not falling every day. But one thing I learned is that when people chronically use those survival strategies of avoidance or numbing, trees will start falling down every single day, more as a consequence of these numbing strategies or avoiding strategies, and it's very sad because, it's addictive, it's addictive. It causes sort of a cycle. Even depression, can look like addiction without substances, because depression, deep collapse, makes families, spouses, children kind of helpless. They cannot help the person, and the person is not seeking help right away when they collapse into depression. So who would say that really this shame dynamic as a process, it's somatic, because when we are afraid of messing up or feeling ashamed, embarrassment, or we are embarrassed through our own recalling, what we did, or we shame and guilt ourselves through negative self-talk, who would say that it is such it's a somatic, it causes inflammation, it isolates you. You don't want to be exposed to people, you put walls up with people that you care and love the most. So it has negative ramifications, huge impact over time, for people's life. So maybe it would be fair. I mean, there's so much to talk, right? Like we could be here for 2 hours, but since we are reframing shame, that it's not just like feeling emotion, but it is a process. And part of it is also that we are actively participating. That can cause self-blame itself, right? Like you may say, Ivona, are you saying that I am shaming myself, that that's my fault? But not at all. Because we are doing it out of some kind of wiring. We wired ourselves, in childhood. It was our adaptive strategies. I go back to just call it like that. It's a process of making sense out of unsupportive environment. We made sense, and only sense we made, it must be me. So I have to either really feel like defective, or I need to really work and strive hard not to feel that way. Either way, it is just like, it's just driving ourselves crazy. And so step one, I see, at least what I got through NARM therapy and NARM training, was to really pause when I hear the self-talk, negative self-talk, when I pressure myself, when I have negative self-talk. And I do it also in therapy, and you have done it with your clients when you pause the process, and you let them know, like, it sounds like, you are really hard on yourself right now. Mhm.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because I also agree, like the takeaway message for our listeners isn't like shame ourselves for the shame.
Yeah, that's the first default we resort ourselves.
Yeah. But I think it's accepting and almost like honoring that how you've survived in your upbringing is by the internal self-blame. And so we honor that survival strategy. And we can add other strategies that will move us towards what we really want for ourselves. And if it's like joy or happiness, etc., like for us to, rather than shame for the shame, is honor what you've done to get to where you are today, and add other strategies where you might want to actually talk nicely to yourself.
Yeah, Norm has this beautiful notion, that goes like, would you talk to your best friend like this? And would you talk to a child like this? And then typically the answer is no, I wouldn't. And then the follow-up question is like, why is it okay that you speak to yourself that way? And then where vulnerability comes up, because it is not okay. And we never really wanted to resort to it. But again, in childhood, there wasn't anything else to other conditions that would prevent us from getting into like a chronic self-rejection or self-blame. Yeah. And I think the somatic part of the shame is to noticing constriction, even like a sort of diaphragm holding, and working even with that, like opening the posture somewhat, just knowing that it is not really true what we are saying to ourselves, but it is something in the environment triggers that shame or fear of it. And since we are social animals, being excluded from the tribe, or being embarrassing yourself is one of the greatest fears we have. And at the same time, we often overestimate, that risk of being excluded from humanity.
Yeah. And actually, as we're doing this talk and being recorded, and knowing that we've got listeners who want to learn and be able to help themselves and their first responder loved ones, I'm even trying to I am practicing, like, just making sure I'm breathing and relaxing into my body, having this 50-50 where I'm aware of myself, but also aware of what Ivona is sharing. And I would just invite the viewers really in this moment to do the same. Like, what are you experiencing in your body, even just listening to this?
Yeah.
And just noticing without judgment or changing. It's just noticing on how huge of a difference. And I like even just naturally start to soften when I notice myself, and I'm in the awareness of myself.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I started feeling my feet more grounded. And also, I got quickly the memory of when I did this very first podcast. I don't think that I was even listening to the person who was talking to. I was just 90% in me, but the 50-50 awareness is that it's not like I'm not paying attention to you 100%. It's more about how to be aware of the physiology while I am with you. And it is a capacity to really cultivate, build, grow. It is really takes time. And as long you see yourself as being a human who is going through this life experience, as it is unfolding, and you are willing and you are open, you are curious, what it could be there more if you are not so hard on yourself, if you learn as a capacity to bring self-acceptance and compassion to yourself as you are going through some tough moments a day, or sometimes there are very difficult, stressful experiences, Yeah.
Yeah. And I just love that this topic is really for helpers and the helpers out there listening, and us being helpers. I would tend to want to attune to that other person's needs, and that's my strategies in my development too,
Yeah.
is tracking what other people need. And I discovered I was chronically abandoning myself and my own
Yeah.
pains. And I found myself having a lot more compassion fatigue and just somatically just extremely tired all the time, and grumpy and irritable, and and I realized as a helper, actually helping is actually helping myself first and foremost, and I can help the other too. It's like you can see both at the same time. So that's been a huge change for me, is to be attuned to myself, and that's okay.
And treatment centers, other even, corporate places need leaders like that, leaders who are self-aware and can hold the complexities, of the place, and not rejecting their needs for self-care and for rest. And it's a great role model, and I really deeply resonate with it. And when in groups, when I talk about these need for rest and giving yourself space to share with others, that's also resonating with first responders. But it's up to them. Take the courage that they have also to reclaim the authenticity, and who knows how many of them would sing and dance every day. I always joke with them when we have a good connecting group, or like, are you ready to sing? And they start laughing. Are you ready to dance? And they start laughing. But it's more invitation for that authentic expression, So who knows what will happen in few years after, like, Shatterproof program, or whoever is out there, and resonates with this topic and healing shame, honoring its adaptive, strategy help, in childhood, but how it no longer allows us to grow, expand, feel alive in a way that we meant to be. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are landing here. I don't know how long we even went, but I want to thank you for being who you are, Dr. Sachi, and going through this learning journey with me and with other therapists here, and just your passion to help. And now you are, you have yourself on board. I have myself on board, and we can be really good role models for other helpers.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our topic, and just sending out my love and compassion for everybody listening. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in. The First Responder Families podcast is sponsored by Shatterproof at FHE Health, a specialized treatment program for first responders with mental health and/or substance use issues. For more information about our show and our services, check out FHEHealth.com. The podcast website also has a place where you can share your ideas or questions for future shows. If you are struggling, we want to help. Feel free to call us at 844-714-3403 or visit FHEHealth.com. We look forward to having you join us for our podcast next month. Until then, take care.